On this week's Political Figure episode, we ponder the question, what the fuck is happening in Forest Lake? For those who don't recall, I recently did a video about an obnoxious mother at a school board meeting. You know, the one who got up in front of everybody with her full chest at a public meeting and said, I teach my kids that they are not allowed to use pronouns, but then said she was mad that the school doesn't allow her kids to call other kids the R word. Anyway, she's from Forest Lake, Minnesota. And when I saw that woman and I made that video, I was like, wow, this must be the worst that Forest Lake has to offer. But I'm a big enough man to admit when I was wrong, and holy shit, Forest Lake, I am so sorry I underestimated how awful some of your people are. Like, I just started snooping around the Forest Lake pages to see what ridiculous shit Laura was posting. And don't get me wrong, there's just some awful and ridiculous shit. Like, she's still tripling down on defending why her kids should be allowed to say the R word. But that was tame compared to people like this dude, Nicholas Palmer, who posts stuff like this and has a fucking white supremacy podcast. And some of the other shit he posted on there is so anti-Semitic and racist, I can't even post it on here because I would definitely catch a violation. How is it that people like Nicholas Aaron Palmer from Forest Lake, Minnesota, who you should definitely never harass if you happen to stumble across their personal information somewhere, can literally say straight up stuff you should, not see? And I ended up with an account warning because I asked a misogynist why they always look like they smell dead skunk. But anyway, this isn't about Nicky Poo here. It's just showing you the stock that Forest Lake is dealing with, just to help you put into perspective where today's political figure, Pete Hegseth, hails from. Now, Peter Brian Hegseth was born June 6, 1980, making him technically a millennial by a few months, but he exudes some serious Gen X energy. He was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but he grew up in Forest Lake, which is something I just learned and am much less happy now that I know. Anyway, he graduated from Forest Lake High in 1999 before going on to get a bachelor's in politics from Princeton. Then a decade later, he would go on to get his master's in public policy from Harvard, which tracks since all of the worst people seem to get degrees from Harvard and Yale. But long before that, and immediately after graduating Princeton, he joined the military, and he was deployed to Guantanamo in 2004, where, I'm sure absolutely nothing sketchy happened, just like I'm sure nothing sketchy happened when another Yale grad, Ron DeFascist, was there as well. He would then go on to serve in Iraq and Afghanistan and bounce back and forth between active duty and reserve service until 2021. You want to know why he finally quit the military? It's because he was one of 12 National Guardsmen pulled from providing security details for Joe Biden during his inauguration. Why was he pulled, you might ask? Only because his fellow service members flagged him for being a white supremacist. And he got mad. He's like, no, I'm not a white supremacist. And then they're like, well, why do you have a bunch of white supremacist tattoos? And he's like, those are just Christian nationalist tattoos. It doesn't mean I'm a white supremacist. Which is totally believable, because he's from Forest Lake, where apparently no white supremacists live, except for Nick Palmer. Anyway, shortly after that, he resigned in disgust because it was so unfair that he was persecuted just simply for his desire to persecute other people. Anyway, during all this time, he was also really involved with a bunch of super PACs and conservative advocacy groups. And actually, I think he did some good things during this time, like the Minnesota PAC under his leadership spent a third of its money on Christmas parties. Less than half of the money was actually spent on candidates and campaigns. Now, that is the type of leadership I like to see running Republican super PACs and advocacy groups. Though I do think he was holding out on the Christmas parties a little bit, and he could have, spent a little bit more. They weren't quite Christmassy enough. But nobody's perfect. And that is very true of Pete. Also, when he was the director of Concerned Veterans for America, he did some nepotism and hired his brother and gave him a 6-figure salary for no apparent reason. In 2014, little Peter became a Fox News contributor and has done and said all of the dumb shit you'd expect from somebody working for Fox. And then in 2015, he summoned his inner Dick Cheney and tried to axe murder a West Point drummer on live television. No, but seriously, Fox, in their infinite wisdom, was doing an axe-throwing event on live television, and they put the military drummers behind the axe-throwing target. And then Pete, who apparently has the axe-throwing accuracy of a drunk Helen Keller, threw it over the target and nailed the drummer. He survived, but still, that's a thing that happened. Then in 2017, at Fox, he cheated on his second wife with his executive producer, who he got pregnant, and then he divorced his second wife in August of 2017 so he could eventually go on to marry said executive producer. But before he did that, in October of 2017, in a California hotel, he drugged and assaulted a woman. Allegedly. And this isn't one of those new recent allegations from somebody who just doesn't like his politics. This was a woman at a women's Republican conference that he spoke at, and she went on and reported it in October of 2017. But let's be real, are we actually gonna believe her? I don't know about you, but I definitely don't think a guy who just got done divorcing his second wife for getting his boss pregnant would ever do anything inappropriate with a woman. She's just probably a psychic member of the deep state who knew that Pete would eventually be a Trump cabinet pick 7 years in the future. Honestly, she might have been just trying to help his career because he probably wouldn't be a Trump cabinet pick if he wasn't a predator. Anyway, a couple of years after he definitely probably Bill Cosby'd a girl, he went on to go advocate for U.S. war criminals being pardoned. And Trump listened and pardoned U.S. service members who had been convicted of things like murdering civilians, including some children, but don't worry, they'd already been born, so that wasn't actually a sin. Oh, and he wrote a book, which is really just a white nationalist manifesto. And in his book, where he wrote things down that you can read, he actively advocates for gerrymandering and rigging elections to screw Democrats. He's also very anti-democracy, and that's not my conjecture. Just ask him. He'll tell you. He, again, wrote it down. After Trump lost in 2020, he wanted a civil war. And to start it, he said they needed to mock, humiliate, intimidate, and crush leftist opponents so that they would attack first. Because like all conservative men, he's a fucking coward who apparently can't pick his own fights. He's called Democrats enemies of America. And he said a victory in America requires getting rid of Islamic people, transgender people, socialists, environmentalists, and atheists and leftists. He said that colleges are indoctrinating children into believing that climate change is a threat rather than Islam. We need to build a border wall and everybody should be required to speak English. And he tried returning his degree from Harvard because they're trying to teach multiculturalism or some shit. But don't worry, he's definitely not a white supremacist, guys, and his tattoos are just because, he's a good Christian, who's probably only allegedly assaulted one girl that we know of and has advocated for war criminals and has a third wife who he got pregnant while still married to his second wife. Just like Jesus. Anyway, he also hates NATO and most of our allies, except for Israel. He loves Israel and all of their work. I'm a big fan. Like, he just thinks that Israel should already have all of the West Bank, and he actively opposes a two-state solution. And then he went on to say that Israel is America's most important ally in fighting domestic enemies. If you're wondering what he meant by domestic enemies, don't worry, he told us. It's us. Specifically, Democrats, leftists, and progressives. And he's also never held public office or any position in government, which makes him Trump's perfect pick for Secretary of Defense. So yeah, all you people who spent the past year protesting for the watermelon people and refused to vote Kamala on their behalf, I'm sure they're sleeping real tight tonight now thanks to your sacrifice, knowing that Pete's the one who's gonna help oversee their single-state solution they're not actually a part of. Now, will Pete be confirmed? That's yet to be seen. There's a couple Republicans who are like, I don't know about this guy. But most of the Republicans are standing behind him, as they do with all of the predators in their party. Just ask Margarine, Taters, and Cream, she'll tell you. But as of now, there's a tiny chance that he won't be the one. However, the luck we've had on this timeline does not have me holding my breath. But whether he is or not, I just gotta ask Forrest Lake, what the actual fuck? Like, honestly, I'm starting to feel like we just need to etch-a-sketch that town, just like bulldoze the whole thing and start over. Because a town that keeps producing people like Pete and Nick and Laura, I don't think can be unfucked.